Hey Cancer, I need you to sit with me for this reading, because what came through in these cards shook me to my core. We are going to talk about something that has been weighing on your heart, something that has kept you up at night wondering why. How could someone treat you with such cruelty when all you did was love them authentically? This is not going to be an easy reading, but it is going to be a truthful one. And I have a feeling that by the time we pull all 10 cards, you are going to understand not just what happened, but why it had to happen exactly this way for your own evolution. Before we dive into this energy, I want to be clear that this is a general reading for entertainment purposes only. I am interpreting the energy I see in these cards, so take what resonates with your personal situation and leave what does not. This is not meant to replace professional advice from therapists, counselors, or other qualified professionals. What I am picking up here is that the cruelty you experienced was not random. It was not about something you did wrong, and it was not a reflection of your value as a person. What I am sensing is something much deeper, much more complex, and honestly much more painful for this person than it was even for you. Though I know that might be hard to believe right now. The universe is showing me that their treatment of you was a desperate act of self-preservation by someone who saw in you everything they could never be, everything they were too afraid to become, and everything that would expose the lies they have been telling themselves for years. So let us pull these cards and get to the heart of why someone who should have cherished you chose cruelty instead. The very first card that came flying out of this deck is Death, and I need you to understand something crucial right from the start. This person looked at you and saw their own death. Not a physical death, but the death of every mask they wear, every lie they tell themselves, every false version of who they pretend to be. When this card appeared in my hands, I felt this immediate heaviness in my chest, this recognition that what happened between you was never really about a relationship ending or a connection dissolving. It was about someone facing the complete annihilation of their false self and choosing to destroy you, instead of letting that transformation happen. Cancer, you have this gift, this almost supernatural ability to see straight through people's defenses and into their soul. And this person knew from the moment they got close to you that they could not hide anymore. The Death card shows a skeleton in black armor riding a white horse, and everything in its path must transform or die. There is no negotiation, no escape, no middle ground. Your presence in their life was that unstoppable force of transformation, and instead of surrendering to the beautiful death and rebirth that could have made them whole, they panicked. What I am picking up is that you loved them in a way that required them to be real, to be vulnerable, to drop every defense and every pretense. And that level of authenticity felt like death to someone who has built their entire identity on illusions. The cruelty you experienced was not because you were too much or not enough. It was because you were exactly right, exactly what they needed, and that terrified them more than anything else ever could. They saw the old version of themselves dying in your light, and they could not handle the vulnerability of rebirth. So they lashed out. They became cruel because cruelty created distance. And distance meant they could keep their masks on, keep their lies intact, keep avoiding the transformation your love was demanding from them. I need you to hear this, Cancer. Their cruelty was an act of cowardice in the face of necessary change, not a statement about your worthiness of love. Now strength appears, but the energy I am getting from this card is reversed, inverted, completely upside down. And this tells me everything about where this person's cruelty actually originated. What I am seeing is someone who is fundamentally weak, not in body, but in spirit, not in appearance, but in character. Someone who has never developed the internal fortitude to face themselves honestly, or handle the intensity of genuine emotional connection. When I look at the traditional strength card, I see a woman gently closing the mouth of a lion, representing the power of compassion over force, the strength of vulnerability over aggression, the courage it takes to be soft in a hard world. But reversed, this card shows me someone who let the lion devour them, someone who operates entirely from their lower instincts, their ego, their need to dominate and control, because they have no real power within themselves. Cancer, this person saw your strength, your ability to feel everything deeply and still choose kindness, your capacity to be hurt and still remain open to love, your resilience in the face of emotional devastation, and it made them feel utterly inadequate. The cruelty you experienced came from a place of profound jealousy and self-hatred. They could not tame their own inner demons, their own insecurity, their own shame, their own rage at themselves for being so weak. So they projected all of that ugliness onto you. What I am picking up is that they felt completely powerless in their own life, trapped in patterns they could not break, stuck in a version of themselves they had outgrown, but lacked the courage to shed, drowning in their own toxicity, and your presence made that powerlessness impossible to ignore. You were a mirror reflecting back to them how far they had fallen from who they could be, and instead of using that reflection to climb back up, they tried to shatter the mirror. Their cruelty was not strength, it was the weakest thing they could do, the path of least resistance, for someone who has never learned self-mastery or self-love. A truly strong person does not need to tear others down to feel powerful, does not need to be cruel to establish boundaries, does not need to destroy someone who loves them to prove their independence. This person mistakes aggression for confidence, domination for strength, emotional unavailability for power, and their treatment of you was a perfect demonstration of how weak they really are beneath all that performance. The Chariot comes charging in next, and when this card appeared, I immediately felt this energy of someone constantly running, always moving, never stopping long enough to actually feel anything real or face any consequences. This card represents willpower, determination, victory through discipline, but what I am seeing in this situation is willpower pointed in the wrong direction, determination to avoid accountability rather than to grow, a desperate need to stay in motion because stillness would mean confronting everything they have been running from. The charioteer on this card is supposed to have control over the two sphinxes pulling in opposite directions, representing mastery over conflicting desires. But what I am picking up is that this person has no real control at all. They are just frantically moving forward, hoping that if they go fast enough, they can outrun their own shadow. Cancer, you represented everything they were running from. You represented depth when they wanted superficiality. You represented emotional presence when they wanted distraction. You represented accountability when they wanted to keep evading responsibility for their impact on others. The cruelty you experienced was their attempt to push you out of the chariot, to keep you from slowing them down, to maintain their forward momentum at any cost, because stopping meant feeling, and feeling meant facing how much damage they have caused, and how empty their constant motion has left them. What is really revealing here is that part of them desperately wanted to stop, wanted to stay with you, wanted to build something real and lasting, but that desire terrified them more than anything because it would require them to actually be present, to be vulnerable, to let someone see them fully and still choose to stay. The two sphinxes represent this internal war, one part pulling toward you and real connection, the other part pulling toward escape and emotional unavailability. And instead of doing the hard work of integration, they just chose the sphinx that let them keep running. Their cruelty was a door slam, a way to ensure you could not chase them, could not slow them down, could not ask them to be accountable for choosing flight over presence. They hurt you so badly that you would stop following, stop hoping, stop believing. They might turn around because deep down they knew if you kept believing in them, they might actually have to face themselves, and that was more than they could handle. The Page of Pentacles shows up next, and this card completely shifted my understanding of this situation, because it reveals something about emotional maturity and readiness that explains so much of their cruelty. Cancer. Listen carefully to what I am about to tell you. This person is a child playing in an adult's body. The page represents someone in the very beginning stages of their journey. Someone who is still learning the most basic lessons about value, commitment, reciprocity, and emotional responsibility, and what you were offering them required king or queen energy to handle properly. You came to them with a fully grown tree, offering shade and fruit and deep roots, and they were still figuring out what a seed even is. The cruelty you experienced was not because you were not valuable enough. It was because you were too valuable for someone who does not yet understand what real value looks like. This card shows a young figure holding a pentacle, studying it with curiosity, but no real comprehension. And that is exactly what happened with your love. They looked at everything you brought to the table, all that loyalty and depth and emotional richness and commitment to growth, and they could not see its worth because they are still measuring value in the most superficial terms. They are still impressed by things that sparkle but have no substance, still chasing instant gratification instead of lasting fulfillment, still operating with the emotional intelligence of someone who has never done any real internal work. What I am picking up is that you were planting seeds for a garden that could sustain both of you for decades, carefully tending to the soil, nourishing the roots, thinking long-term about what you were cultivating together, and they just wanted immediate results, quick rewards, something that looked good right now, without requiring the patience and effort that real growth demands. The Page of Pentacles also represents someone who is still making rookie mistakes, still learning through trial and error, still too immature to understand that some things should not be experiments and some people should not be practice. Their cruelty came from ignorance as much as malice, from immaturity as much as genuine callousness. But Cancer, that does not make it acceptable, and it does not mean you should wait around for them to grow up. They have lessons to learn, but you are not their teacher, and your heart is not their classroom. The Hermit appears now, and when I pulled this card, I felt this profound sense of isolation, of someone who has built walls so high that they can no longer see the sky. This card represents solitude, introspection, seeking wisdom in isolation. But what I am seeing is that their cruelty has led them to a very dark and lonely place, whether they have consciously realized it yet or not. The Hermit carries a lantern to light the way through darkness. But what I am picking up is that this person is standing in self-created darkness, holding a lantern that illuminates nothing but their own shadow. Cancer. There is something deeply karmic about this card's placement in this reading. By pushing you away through cruelty, by choosing to hurt someone who genuinely cared for them, by sabotaging a connection that could have healed them, they have isolated themselves from the very thing that could have brought them into the light. The universe is essentially forcing them into a corner where they have no choice but to face themselves, but that is their journey to walk, not yours to guide them through. What is showing up here is that they will spend a long time alone, replaying their choices, wondering why they always destroy good things, questioning why they cannot maintain healthy connections, and that solitude is exactly what they need for their evolution. But it is also exactly what they fear most. The cruelty was partially an attempt to control the narrative of the ending, to be the one who leaves rather than the one who gets left, to isolate themselves on their own terms before you could see clearly enough to walk away first. But here is what they did not anticipate: that isolation imposed by choice feels completely different than isolation earned through self-sabotage, and they are about to learn that difference intimately. The Hermit also represents the wisdom that comes from deep self-reflection, and eventually, maybe months or years from now, they might develop enough awareness to understand what they lost and why they lost it. But that realization will come too late, and that is their burden to carry. For you, Cancer, this card is also significant because it represents your own need for solitude right now. Not isolation born from cruelty, but sacred solitude chosen for healing. Time alone to reconnect with yourself, to remember who you were before this connection, to rebuild your sense of worth that their cruelty tried to destroy. Three of Swords pierces through next, and Cancer, I am not going to sugarcoat this because you have already lived through the pain this card represents. When this card appeared, I felt the heartbreak radiating from it, but I also felt something else, something underneath the pain that is actually incredibly important for your healing. This card shows three swords piercing a heart against a stormy sky, and each of those swords represents a specific wound that this person inflicted on you. The first sword is betrayal, the gut-wrenching realization that someone you trusted with your soft places could turn around and weaponize your vulnerability against you, could take all the intimate knowledge they gained from your openness and use it to hurt you in the places you are most tender. The second sword is disillusionment, the complete shattering of the image you had of who they were, what they were capable of, what you meant to each other, the death of the story you were telling yourself about this connection and its potential. The third sword is grief, the mourning not just of what was, but of what could have been, if they had been emotionally capable of meeting you with the same authenticity and care you offered them. The loss of a future you had imagined, the end of possibilities you had believed in. But here's what I need you to understand about this card. As devastating as this heartbreak feels, as much as it hurts to breathe some days, this pain is actually the beginning of your liberation, not the end of your story. The Three of Swords is excruciating, but it is also clarifying in ways that gentler lessons never could be. It cuts through illusions like a knife through silk. It forces truth to the surface no matter how much we want to hide from it. It makes it impossible to stay in denial about who someone really is beneath the mask they show the world. This person's cruelty broke your heart wide open, split it apart, exposed every vulnerable piece, and I know that feels like the worst thing that could possibly happen. But Cancer, what the cards are showing me is that this breaking was absolutely necessary for your evolution into who you are becoming. You needed to see their true nature in its full ugliness. You needed to experience the complete extent of their inability to love you the way you deserve. You needed to feel this pain deeply enough that you would never make excuses for this kind of treatment again, because otherwise you might have stayed, hoping and waiting and diminishing yourself, making yourself smaller to fit into their limited capacity for connection. The pain is real, the heartbreak is valid, but it is also serving a sacred purpose in your journey. Seven of Pentacles appears, and this card brings such a crucial perspective to everything you have been through because it is fundamentally about investment and return, about effort and harvest, about what you planted versus what actually grew. When I pulled this card, I immediately felt this energy of exhaustion, of someone who has been tending a garden alone for far too long, watering plants that never bloom, nurturing seeds that never sprout, believing that if they just work hard enough, care enough, give enough, eventually they will see the fruits of their labor. Cancer, you invested everything into this connection. You gave your time, your energy, your emotional labor, your patience, your understanding, your forgiveness, your hope, your faith in their potential. And what I am seeing is that you gave and gave and gave until you had nothing left to give, waiting for a return that was never going to come. The figure on this card is pausing mid-work, leaning on their tool, looking at what has grown, assessing whether all this effort has been worthwhile. And that is exactly where you are right now in your healing journey. You are finally at the point where you can look clearly at what this connection actually produced versus what you hoped it would produce, what you actually received versus what you deserved to receive. The cruelty you experienced is part of the harvest, Cancer, and it is bitter fruit that is showing you a truth you needed to see. No matter how much you invest in someone who is not ready, willing, or capable of reciprocating that investment, no matter how much love and care and effort you pour into barren soil, you cannot force growth that they have not chosen for themselves. This person did not tend to the garden you were trying to build together. They did not water the seeds of connection you planted. They did not nurture what was growing between you. They did not put in even a fraction of the work you were doing. Instead, they let everything wither and die while you exhausted yourself trying to do the work of two people, trying to compensate for their lack of effort, trying to build alone what should have been a shared creation. The Seven of Pentacles is asking you to be brutally honest about the return on your investment here, to stop waiting for a harvest from seeds that were never properly planted or cared for, to recognize that your efforts were being poured into soil that was never going to yield the abundance you deserved. Three of Pentacles comes through, and this card illuminates something that was missing from this entire connection, something that should have been the foundation, but was never actually present. This card represents collaboration, teamwork, mutual effort, and most importantly, recognition and respect for each other's contributions to a shared vision. When I look at the traditional image, I see three figures working together on building a cathedral: an architect, a craftsman, and a monk, each bringing their unique skills and expertise, each valued for what they contribute, each essential to the creation of something greater than any of them could build alone. But Cancer, what I am picking up is that this energy was completely absent from your dynamic with this person. They never saw you as an equal partner in building something meaningful together. They never valued your contributions. They never recognized the emotional architecture you were designing, the careful craftsmanship you were applying to every interaction, the sacred intention you brought to this connection. The cruelty you experienced came partly from their fundamental refusal to acknowledge your worth, to appreciate what you were bringing to the table, to treat this connection as something that required both of your efforts to succeed. What is really revealing here is that they wanted all the benefits of your labor, without contributing any labor themselves. They wanted you to build them a cathedral, while they criticized. From the sidelines, they wanted the finished product without participating in the process. The Three of Pentacles also represents the recognition that quality work deserves, the respect that skilled contributions earn, the appreciation that effort commands, and this person not only failed to give you any of that recognition, they actively undermined and devalued everything you built. They treated your efforts with contempt rather than gratitude. They dismissed your emotional investment rather than honoring it. They took everything you offered and made you feel foolish for offering it, like your care was a weakness rather than a strength. What I am sensing is that on some deep level, they knew they could not match what you were bringing. They knew they were not operating with the same integrity or intention or commitment to quality, and instead of rising to meet you at your level, they tried to drag you down to theirs through cruelty. The absence of true collaboration, true partnership, true mutual respect and appreciation is why this connection became toxic rather than generative, and their cruelty was a symptom of their complete unwillingness to be a real partner in any meaningful sense. The King of Wands appears now, and this card is absolutely fascinating because it reveals the massive gap between who this person thinks they are and who they actually demonstrate themselves to be through their actions. When I pulled this card, I felt this energy of someone who has constructed an entire identity around being powerful, charismatic, visionary, independent, a natural leader who inspires others and creates bold new realities through sheer force of will. The King of Wands in the upright position represents someone who has mastered their creative fire, who leads with integrity and courage, who uses their considerable personal power to uplift and inspire others, who builds empires not through domination, but through vision that others willingly follow. But what the cards are showing me is that this person has the costume of the king, without any of the actual qualities that make someone worthy of that crown. They see themselves as this powerful, untouchable figure who does not need anyone, who makes bold moves, who lives by their own rules, who answers to no one, and they have built their entire self-image around this fantasy of sovereign independence. But Cancer, a true king, does not need to be cruel to establish their authority, does not need to tear others down to feel elevated, does not need to destroy someone who loves them to prove their power. What I am picking up is that they are so deeply invested in maintaining this image of themselves as strong and independent that they had to push you away violently, had to be cruel in the rejection, because needing you, caring about you, being emotionally affected by you, allowing themselves to be vulnerable with you, all of that threatened the entire persona they have constructed. The cruelty was them performing strength for an audience of their own ego, trying desperately to convince themselves and you that they are this untouchable king who does not need emotional connection or intimacy or partnership. But real kings, real leaders, people with genuine power and confidence, they do not need to perform strength through cruelty. They do not need to prove their independence by destroying connection. They do not need to assert dominance through emotional violence. This person is wearing a crown that does not fit, sitting on a throne they have not earned, playing a role they lack the character to embody. And their treatment of you was part of that desperate performance, an attempt to maintain an illusion of power that is fundamentally hollow at its core. Judgment arrives as the final card, and Cancer. When this card appeared in my hands, I felt this overwhelming sense of completion, of cosmic justice, of everything coming full circle in a way that is both devastating and incredibly freeing. This is the card of awakening, of final truth, of resurrection and rebirth, of karmic accountability that cannot be avoided or denied. The angel on this card is blowing a trumpet, calling all souls to rise from their graves and be judged, calling for a final reckoning where everyone must face the truth of who they are and what they have done. What I am interpreting from this powerful placement is that this entire painful experience, every moment of cruelty, every act of betrayal, every wound inflicted, has been your call to awakening. You are being summoned to rise from the ashes of this connection, to resurrect yourself from the death of who you were before you understood what you now know, to see yourself and your worth with absolute clarity that leaves no room for doubt or diminishment. The cruelty you experienced was the trumpet blast that woke you up from a dream you did not even realize you were sleeping through, a dream where you accepted less than you deserved, where you made excuses for behavior that was inexcusable, where you dimmed your own light to make someone else comfortable in their darkness. But this card also carries the profound energy of karmic justice, and I need you to understand something crucial. This person will absolutely face the consequences of their actions. Not because you wish it upon them or seek revenge, but because the universe operates on immutable laws of cause and effect, and what you put out into the world always comes back to you eventually. They planted seeds of cruelty, deception, emotional violence, betrayal, and they will reap that harvest in ways you may never witness, but that are already in motion. The Judgment card promises that everyone must eventually stand before the truth of their own actions. Everyone must account for how they treated others. Everyone faces their reflection in the mirror of cosmic justice. For you, this card represents total liberation, a final and complete release from this connection, a clarity so pure that you can move forward without looking back, without wondering what if, without hoping they will change. You have been judged worthy, Cancer, worthy of love that does not wound, worthy of partnership that does not diminish, worthy of being seen and valued and cherished. And anyone who could not recognize that worth has judged themselves unworthy of your continued presence in their life. Cancer, as we close this reading, I want you to take a moment to really absorb everything these 10 cards revealed about why you were treated with such cruelty. This was never about your worth, never about what you did or failed to do, never about you being too much or not enough. What we saw in these cards was someone facing their own necessary death and choosing cruelty over transformation. Someone operating from profound internal weakness, while you offered strength. Someone constantly running from presence and accountability. Someone too immature to recognize the value of what you brought. Someone isolated by their own choices. Someone who broke your heart in a way that will ultimately set you free. Someone who refused to reciprocate your investment. Someone incapable of true partnership. Someone performing a version of power they do not actually possess. And the promise of karmic justice already in motion. You did not deserve cruelty, but you deserve to see the truth clearly enough that you could finally release this connection without guilt or regret. The universe showed you exactly what you needed to see, even though it hurt, even though it shattered your heart, even though it broke illusions you wanted desperately to keep believing. Now you know better. Now you see clearly. Now you understand that not everyone is capable of honoring what you offer, and that limitation is theirs to live with, not yours to fix. You are being called into your full power now, Cancer, into a version of yourself that knows your worth so deeply that you will never again accept cruelty as the price of connection. Never again diminish yourself to fit someone else's limited capacity. Never again mistake someone's potential for their reality. Trust that everything happened exactly as it needed to for your highest evolution. Trust that the heartbreak was making space for something immeasurably better. Trust that you are rising from these ashes more powerful than you have ever been. And trust that the love you have always been capable of giving, you are finally ready to receive.